My coworker loves taking credit for other people's work. Then he got exposed. So I work at this tech company where we do software development, and there's this guy named Brandon who's basically a professional idea thief. He'd been pulling this crap for months, taking credit for code fixes, stealing presentation ideas, even claiming he came up with solutions that other people obviously thought of first. The worst part was how smooth he was about it. He'd wait until someone wasn't in a meeting and then casually mention how his idea saved the project. Or he'd send follow-up emails after team discussions where he'd summarize everything but somehow make it sound like all the good stuff came from him. I started noticing this pattern when my cubicle neighbor Jess spent 3 days debugging this nightmare database issue. She finally cracked it on a Friday afternoon and sent out this detailed email explaining the fix. Monday morning rolls around and Brandon's in the weekly team meeting talking about the solution I developed over the weekend for that exact same problem. Jess just sat there looking stunned. She's pretty quiet and doesn't like confrontation, so she didn't say anything, but I could see her face turning red. That was just one example. Brandon did this constantly. He'd swoop in during the last 5 minutes of brainstorming sessions and somehow get credit for the best ideas. He'd volunteer to present the team's findings and then structure his presentation like he was the mastermind behind everything. The guy was getting promoted faster than anyone else in our department because our manager thought he was some kind of genius problem solver. Meanwhile, people like Jess, who actually did the work, were getting overlooked. So I decided to start keeping track. Every time Brandon pulled his credit-stealing routine, I'd screenshot the original emails, save the chat logs, document who was actually in which meetings. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with all this evidence, but I figured it might come in handy eventually. Then last month, we had this huge project presentation to the executives. Brandon volunteered to present our team's work, which should have been a red flag right there since he barely contributed anything meaningful to the actual project. The presentation day arrives, and Brandon's up there in his best suit, clicking through slides and talking about his comprehensive approach and the innovative solutions he developed. The executives are nodding and taking notes, clearly impressed. Then comes the Q&A section. One of the VPs asks a really specific technical question about the implementation details. Brandon starts giving this vague, hand-wavy answer that doesn't really make sense. The VP presses him for more specifics. Brandon's starting to sweat now, trying to bullshit his way through an explanation of code he didn't write and a process he wasn't actually involved in designing. That's when I decided to speak up. I raised my hand and said, "Actually, I think Jess would be better positioned to answer that question since she developed that particular module." The room got quiet. Brandon shot me this death glare, but what was he going to do? Say no? He could handle it? He was already clearly struggling. Jess looked terrified for a second, but then she stood up and gave this perfect, detailed explanation of exactly how the system worked. The executives started asking follow-up questions, and she answered every single one flawlessly. After the meeting, the VP pulled Jess aside and asked her about her role in the project. That opened the floodgates. She started explaining how she'd actually designed most of the core functionality that Brandon had been taking credit for. Word got back to our manager, who started asking questions. That's when I came forward with my folder of evidence. Months of screenshots, emails, and documentation showing Brandon's pattern of stealing credit. Within a week, Brandon was called into HR. Turns out they did their own investigation and found even more examples of him taking credit for other people's work. He got written up officially and lost out on a promotion he was supposedly a shoo-in for. The best part, though, was watching him try to present ideas in meetings after that. Everyone was watching him like hawks now. Anytime he'd start to claim credit for something, people would immediately jump in with, "Actually, wasn't that Sarah's suggestion?" Or, "I think Mike came up with that approach first." Brandon transferred to a different department a few weeks later. Probably figured he'd burned too many bridges in ours. Jess got the promotion he was supposed to get. She deserved it.